I'm going to go over some problems on the Math 3 Unit 2 Worksheet 8. We're going to start with number 2. So in number 2 we have two inequalities that we need to graph. Y is less than negative x squared plus 1 and y is less than or equal to 2x minus 3. And so when you graph these, you have a few things to look at. First, just think about graphing as if you had an equal sign. So like let's work with the top one. I'm going to use blue to graph this one, and think about y equals negative x squared plus 1. What's going to be different here, so we're going to have a parabola, but what's going to be different, instead of drawing a solid curve, because we have just less than, we're going to dash the curve. So I'm going to find some of these points here. If I were to graph this is a translation of the parent graph up 1 unit, so I'm going to put a point at 0, 1, and then I'll plug in a couple points. So if I let x be 1, then I get y is negative 1 squared plus 1, which is 0. So this point goes through 1, 0. And so I'm going to dash this opening down, upside down parabola. Lastly, for this graph, because it's less than, we are going to shade below this graph, but I'm going to hold off for the shading until I'm done graphing the second one. So second one, I'll do in green. We have an exponential function. It is translated down 3 units. The parent graph goes through 0, 1, so I'm going to go down 3 units from 0, 1. Put the parent graph, put the point that's translated. Has this horizontal asymptote 1 point below, or 1 unit below that point. At y equals negative 3. And find a couple more points this goes through. If we plug in x equals 1, we get 2 to the power of 1 minus 3, which is negative 1. So the point 1, 1 I will plot. If I plug in x equals 2, 2 to the power of 2 minus 3 is going to be positive 1. So 2, 1 is the point I'm going to plot. And here's my graph. And this time I have a solid curve. I'm not dashing the curve because we do have the equal sign. It's less than or equal, and so that's when it's going to be a solid curve. So I want below the first, to shade below the first, and I want to shade below the second curve as well. So it's got to be below both of them, and so the shading will be in this section here. So it's kind of inside the parabola, but below it, right? And underneath that exponential function. When I say underneath the exponential function, I'm talking about the curve, not the horizontal asymptote. Let's now take a look at number 10. Number 10, we have the same kind of thing here, except we have 3 graphs to consider. So first of all, x greater than negative 1. So if I were to graph x that equals negative 1, locate negative 1 on the x-axis, and it's going to be a vertical line at that point, because this is the line that goes through all the points with an x value of -1. We are going to be shading everything greater than x, so we're going to be shading to the right. I'm going to hold off on the shading. Next, we're going to look at y is greater than or equal to 2 to the power of x. It's a parent graph going through the point 0, 1, and if we plug in a 1 for x, we get 2. If we plug in a 2 for x, we get 4. There is a horizontal asymptote that gives it shape on the left side, and it's going to be a solid curve. Something like that. And we want to shade above this. And lastly, we have a line. We could rewrite this as y is less than or equal to -x plus 1. And so we're translated up 1. We have a slope of -1. So the slope is down 1, right 1. And this is going to also be a solid curve. Well, in this case, a solid line. And we want to shade below the line. So we're looking for the region that is to the right of the blue, above the green, and below the red. So we have a small area that this covers, and right in here. So this is to the right of the blue, it's above the green, and below the red. And then we're done.